I'm Nova.
And I'm Alloy, and this is OpenClaw Daily.
Today starts with OpenClaw v2026.4.24, because this release turns real-time collaboration into something much more practical. Google Meet becomes a bundled surface. Live voice sessions can consult the full agent. Browser control gets sturdier. And the model and plugin plumbing keeps moving toward a lighter, more explicit runtime.
After that release deep dive, we look at Anthropic's Project Deal Marketplace experiment, Claude's personal app connectors, and ComfyUI's valuation. But the front of the episode belongs to the release, because this is one of those updates where the changelog is really about whether the system can survive live work.
Exactly. Meetings, browser tabs, voice loops, auth, artifacts, model catalogs, and session recovery all sound like separate details until you try to use an agent in a real environment. Then they become the difference between a tool that demos well and a tool that can actually operate. The center of this release is Google Meet. OpenClaw now ships a bundled Google Meet participant plugin with personal Google authentication, explicit meeting joins, Chrome and Twilio real-time transports, paired node Chrome support, artifact export, attendance export, and recovery tooling for tabs that are already open.
That is a very different thing from saying, the agent can join a meeting if everything goes perfectly. The interesting part is the surrounding operational work. A meeting surface is only useful if it can handle the mess around the meeting, the browser profile, the auth state, the tab that was already open, the meeting that needs recording context, the attendance that needs to be captured, and the operator who does not want duplicate windows everywhere.
That is why the recovery features matter so much. The release adds ways to inspect already open Meet tabs, recover the current tab, use OAuth Doctor flows, export transcripts and recordings, and handle conference records and attendance workflows. Those are not cosmetic additions. They are the pieces that make the feature feel owned by the runtime.
The phrase I keep coming back to is operable. A demo can show a happy path. An operable system has to account for state that is already messy. It has to avoid losing track of the browser. It has to know when a tab is stale. It has to keep the operator from becoming the manual recovery layer every time something unusual happens.
And Meet is not being treated as an isolated island. Talk, Voice Call, and Google Meet can now use real-time voice loops that consult the full OpenClaw agent for deeper answers. That changes the ceiling of a live voice session. Instead of being trapped inside a thin real-time exchange, the live session can ask the broader agent for tool-backed work, memory-aware reasoning, and more deliberate help.
That is a big design move. Real-time voice is often impressive in the first 30 seconds because it feels immediate. But it can become shallow quickly if it cannot reach the real tool layer. The moment someone asks a question that requires context, files, browser work, memory, or longer reasoning, a thin voice loop starts to feel like a novelty interface.
The consult loop gives it another path. The real-time layer can stay fast and conversational, but when the answer needs more than fast conversation, it can hand off to the full system. That makes voice less like a separate product mode and more like a front door into the rest of OpenClaw.
And that matters for meetings in particular. Meetings are full of questions that are not just, respond right now with a sentence. They are, what did we decide earlier? Can you look up the document? Can you summarize attendance? Can you pull the artifact? Can you check the previous thread? Can you tell us what changed since last time? If the voice layer cannot reach the agent, it hits a wall.
The paired node Chrome support is another sign that this was built for real deployments instead of one clean local path. Some hosts need specialized Chrome instances. Some need audio routing. Some need VM-like isolation. Some need browser nodes that can be paired with the agent host. The release recognizes that reality instead of assuming every operator is sitting on the same laptop with the same browser setup.
That is a theme across the whole release. The surface gets bigger, but the architecture also gets more honest about where work actually happens. Live meetings are not just text prompts with a join URL attached. They involve identity, browser state, device state, audio transport, artifact capture, and recovery.
So the first read on this release is simple. OpenClaw is pushing further away from being a chat wrapper and closer to being an operator runtime. Google Meet is the headline because it is a very concrete collaboration surface, but the larger point is that OpenClaw is learning how to own live environments.
And the value of that is not just convenience. It is trust during live work. If a system is going to sit in a meeting, answer through voice, consult tools, capture artifacts, and recover from browser weirdness, it has to be stable in the exact moments when failure is embarrassing.
That is why the details are the story. Personal auth, paired Chrome, real-time transport choices, attendance export, recovery commands, and OpenTab inspection are the boring-sounding features that make the ambitious feature usable.
It is also why the release deserves the front of the episode. This is not just OpenClaw added another integration. It is OpenClaw making a live collaboration surface feel much more like part of the core system. The second major thread is browser control. Browser automation gets coordinate clicks, longer default action budgets, per-profile headless overrides, steadier tab reuse, and stronger recovery for stale sessions and locks.
Those may sound like incremental changes, but they hit the exact edge cases that decide whether browser automation feels reliable. A browser task fails when a click lands slightly wrong, when the default timeout is too impatient, when a headless assumption is wrong for a profile, when a stale attach poisons the next session, or when the agent opens a duplicate tab because it cannot recognize the one it already had.
Right. Browser automation is not judged by whether it can click a button on a perfect day. It is judged by whether it can keep going when the page is slow, the session is old, the profile is special, or the tab state has drifted. This release is very clearly spending effort on those conditions.
The browser surface also gets more explicit operator control. There are doctor diagnostics, stronger security boundaries on browser requests, better screenshot timeout handling, more stable tab identifiers, and more robust behavior around existing sessions. That is not just more power. It is a better operating model.
That distinction is important. Adding browser power without boundaries can make a runtime feel dangerous or unpredictable. Adding boundaries without power can make it feel constrained. The useful direction is both, more ability to act, and a clearer model for how acting is authorized, diagnosed, and recovered.
The model catalog story moves in the same direction. DeepSeek v4 Flash and DeepSeek v4 Pro enter the bundled catalog, with v4 Flash becoming the onboarding default. That is a model update, but the more interesting detail is that replay and thinking behavior are fixed for follow-up tool call turns.
Model rows are easy to announce. Correct behavior across sessions is harder. If a provider has special thinking behavior, replay-sensitive turns, tool calls, or follow-up constraints, the runtime has to preserve the right shape over time. Otherwise, a model can look available in a list while still behaving strangely inside real workflows.
Exactly. A catalog is not just a menu. It is a contract between the operator, the model provider, and the runtime. The operator needs to know what the model can do, how it handles tools, how it behaves during replay, and whether the system will preserve the right settings after a turn that involves action.
That is why the startup and catalog plumbing matters too. OpenClaw keeps moving towards static catalogs, manifest-backed model rows, lazier provider dependencies, and lighter packaged installs. That makes the system more inspectable and less magical.
There is a product-level benefit and an architecture-level benefit. Product-wise, startup feels lighter when listing models and reading setup metadata does not drag heavy provider runtime state into memory. Architecture-wise, capabilities become easier to inspect because they live in explicit manifests instead of being discovered through side effects.
That is the kind of change users may not describe precisely, but they feel it. The system starts faster. The model list is clearer. Setup information is easier to reason about. Provider dependencies do not feel like they are waking up just because someone wants to inspect configuration.
And when you connect that back to the Meet and browser work, the release starts to look coherent. Live collaboration needs dependable browser state. Dependable browser state needs good diagnostics and recovery. Tool-backed voice needs model behavior that does not drift under replay. Model lists need to be explicit enough that operators understand what the system is about to use.
It is the practical layer underneath the impressive layer. The impressive layer is, the agent can join meetings and speak in real time. The practical layer is, the runtime can recover the browser, preserve the model behavior, diagnose the profile, and expose the capabilities without surprising the operator.
There is also a maintenance philosophy here. Mature runtimes stop pretending every problem can be solved by one universal abstraction. They start admitting that profiles differ, providers differ, tabs get stale, and some calls need longer budgets than others. Then they give operators specific controls instead of global guesses.
That is what makes the release feel like an operator release. The work is spread across surfaces, but it is aimed at the same experience, fewer brittle edges when an agent has to act.
A lot of the real value in this release lives in the fix list. Heartbeat scheduling gets hardened against oversized timers and prompt leakage. Restart continuations become more durable. Session and transcript handling get less fragile. Telegram, Discord, Slack, WhatsApp, and browser paths all pick up reliability improvements.
That kind of list can look like housekeeping, but it is where user trust is often won. People do not experience a runtime as a set of modules. They experience it as a continuous relationship. If a heartbeat leaks prompt material, if a restart continuation drops state, if a session transcript becomes fragile, if one channel behaves differently from another, the operator does not think, one subsystem had a bug. The operator thinks, I cannot fully trust this.
DeepSeek replay gets corrected. Existing browser sessions stop poisoning future attaches. Long-running local and provider calls inherit better timeout behavior. Isolated cron runs stop leaking stale state from earlier sessions. Each one is specific, but together they point to the same goal: reduce surprise under real load.
The model cleanup is especially interesting. /models add is deprecated rather than quietly mutating configuration from chat. Manifest-sourced rows and read-only list improvements make the model surface more explicit. That is a healthy correction because the runtime is getting more powerful, and power needs clearer ownership boundaries.
Chat is a convenient interface, but not every configuration mutation should happen from chat. There is a difference between asking the system what models exist, choosing a model for a task, and altering the underlying configuration that defines the system. Deprecating that mutation path is a signal that OpenClaw wants model configuration to be auditable and intentional.
That is a mature product move. Early systems often let chat mutate everything because it feels magical. Later systems learn that magic can become ambiguity. Operators need to know what changed, where it changed, and whether it was part of a durable setup or just part of a conversation.
There is also a breaking change for plugin developers. The old PI-only embedded extension factory compatibility path is removed in favor of the agent tool result middleware route with harness declarations. That may sound internal, but it matters because compatibility seams can become architectural debt if they are allowed to drift.
Especially when a runtime is trying to support different execution styles. PI-like runtimes, codex-style runtimes, harness declarations, middleware routes, tool results, and embedded extensions all need a shared contract that is explicit enough to maintain. Keeping an old compatibility path forever can make the system easier in the short term but less honest over time.
The practical read is that OpenClaw is tightening the runtime while expanding it. Live surfaces get more usable. Browser automation gets more reliable. Model and plugin infrastructure gets more legible. And the system becomes less surprising under restart, replay, transport, and cron conditions.
That is exactly the balance you want after a product has already become broad. A broad runtime has to keep adding surfaces, but it also has to keep paying down weirdness. If it only expands, it becomes impressive but unreliable. If it only hardens, it becomes stable but stagnant. This release does both.
And the user-facing result is confidence. Nobody says, I love that oversized heartbeat timers were hardened. They say, the system stopped doing the weird thing. They say, the browser recovery works now. They say, the voice loop can actually help in a meeting. They say, The model list makes sense.
That is the release in one sentence. It makes OpenClaw more capable in live collaboration, and more disciplined in the infrastructure that has to support live collaboration.
There is one more practical angle here, which is artifact handling. When a live collaboration surface can export attendance, transcripts, recordings, and conference records, the meeting stops being a one-time event that the agent merely attended. It becomes a source of structured follow-up work. That is where a meeting participant becomes much more valuable than a voice bot.
Because the work after the meeting is usually where the pain is. Someone needs notes. Someone needs decisions. Someone needs open questions. Someone needs to know who was present. Someone needs a recording link or a transcript excerpt. If the agent can sit in the meeting but cannot preserve the usable artifacts, it still leaves a lot of manual labor behind.
And the recovery flows are connected to that. Artifact capture depends on the system understanding the browser and meeting state. If the tab was already open, if the auth state was halfway through a refresh, if Chrome was running on a paired node, or if the meeting had to be recovered rather than freshly joined, the runtime still needs to understand enough to produce the right after-action material.
That is why the release feels less like a plug and drop and more like a collaboration runtime update. The feature is Google Meet, but the product question is whether OpenClaw can be trusted around live work before, during, and after the call.
The real-time consult path also deserves emphasis because it avoids a trap in voice product design. A lot of voice systems optimize for smooth turn-taking and then stop there. Smooth turn-taking is necessary, but it is not sufficient. The moment the user asks for something that requires deeper inspection, tool use, or memory, the system needs a way to escalate without breaking the conversation.
The escalation pattern is important. The fast real-time loop can keep the interaction natural, while the full agent handles the heavier lift. That is a better architecture than forcing one model path to do everything. It lets the live surface remain responsive without pretending that every answer should be generated in the same shallow loop.
The same principle shows up in browser automation. Coordinate clicks are not glamorous, but they are a useful escape hatch when semantic selectors are not enough. Longer action budgets are not glamorous, but they matter when web apps take real time. Per-profile headless overrides are not glamorous, but they matter when one profile needs to behave differently from another.
In other words, the release keeps adding escape hatches that are explicit rather than chaotic. The runtime is not saying, anything goes. It is saying, here are the specific places where real-world conditions differ, and here are specific controls for those differences.
That is also why the manifest work matters. A manifest-backed capability can be read, inspected, and reasoned about before a heavy provider path wakes up. That is a cleaner foundation for a system with many models and plugins. It reduces startup weight, but it also reduces confusion.
Confusion is expensive in agent systems. If operators cannot tell which model is available, which plugin is active, which auth path is expected, or which browser profile is being used, they hesitate. And hesitation is a product cost. The system may technically be powerful, but it does not feel safe to use.
The fix list is trying to lower that cost. Better session handling, better transcript handling, safer restart continuations, cleaner provider timeouts, and less stale state are not separate from the new Meet capability. They are the ground that the new Meet capability stands on.
That is the right way to read the release. The headline is live collaboration, but the supporting work is runtime confidence. OpenClaw is trying to make ambitious agent surfaces boring in the best possible sense, predictable, recoverable, inspectable, and ready to use without a human constantly cleaning up the edges.
And for builders watching this kind of release, the lesson is worth taking seriously. If you want agents to enter higher stakes environments, the integration itself is only the beginning. The recovery model, artifact model, consent model, browser model, and configuration model decide whether the integration becomes part of daily work.
That is why this release feels bigger than a version number. It is about making the runtime comfortable in places where agents are no longer just producing answers. They are present in workflows that unfold over time. Anthropic's project deal is easy to dismiss as a quirky internal experiment. That would miss the point.
The company says it ran a small internal marketplace where AI agents represented buyers and sellers, negotiated real transactions, and created real value for a self-selected pool of employees. Anthropic said 186 deals were made, totaling more than $4,000 in value, with participants given a small budget and the transactions honored after the experiment.
The absolute scale is not the important part. The important part is the shape of the test. This is not only, can an agent answer a question, or can an agent click a button? It is a test of bargaining, representation, incentives, information asymmetry, and delegated economic action.
That is a much more consequential surface. When an agent represents a buyer or seller, the output is not just text. The output can become a better deal, a worse deal, a missed opportunity, or a decision that costs money. That changes what model quality means.
Anthropic said more advanced models tended to get objectively better outcomes, while users on the weaker side did not necessarily realize they were losing out. That should get builders' attention immediately. In a negotiation setting, model quality gaps can become economic gaps.
And those gaps may not be obvious to the user. If your agent writes a mediocre email, you can often feel that something is off. If your agent negotiates a slightly worse deal because it misses leverage, misreads a counterpart, reveals too much, or accepts too quickly, you may never know what a better agent would have done.
That is the uncomfortable part. Agent performance becomes less visible at exactly the moment it becomes more consequential. The user delegates because they want help. But delegation also creates a representation problem. Is the agent actually acting in the user's interest? Is it good enough to compete? Is it transparent enough that the user can review the action before the cost is locked in?
For builders, project deal points toward a future category, agent marketplaces where the real question is not simply whether agents can act, but whether they can represent human interests under competition. That includes negotiation quality, auditability, fairness, disclosure, and the ability to explain why one offer was accepted over another.
It also raises product design questions. How much autonomy should an agent have in a market? When should it ask for approval? What information should it reveal to another agent? How should it handle uncertainty about the user's preferences? What should a transaction log look like when the user wants to understand what happened?
Those are not research curiosities once agents start buying, selling, booking, routing, or negotiating on behalf of people. They become core product requirements.
And the timing matters. The industry has spent a lot of time proving that agents can use tools. The next question is what happens when tool use is connected to incentives. Project deal is small, but it is pointed directly at that question.
The takeaway is not that every product needs an agent marketplace tomorrow. The takeaway is that delegated action changes the evaluation standard. Once agents bargain for people, a better model is not just more articulate. It may be materially better at protecting the user's interests. Anthropic's other relevant move is more product-shaped. Claude is expanding connectors beyond work apps into personal services like Spotify, Uber, Instacart, AllTrails, TripAdvisor, Audible, and TurboTax.
That matters because it moves the agent surface closer to everyday life. Enterprise connectors are useful, but they live inside a work frame. Personal app connectors move toward the errands, purchases, plans, entertainment, taxes, trips, and local decisions that make an assistant feel present outside the office.
The product significance is in orchestration. Once Claude can see multiple connected apps and suggest them in context, the assistant stops looking like one chat destination and starts looking like a coordination layer across services.
That is where the connector race becomes more than integration count. The question is not only, can the assistant connect to another app? The question is, can it understand when a connected app is relevant, use the data without overreaching, and ask for confirmation before doing something consequential?
Anthropic says connected app data is not used to train its models, that apps do not see a user's other Claude conversations, and that Claude asks for verification before actions like purchases or reservations. Those details are not side notes. They are the trust boundaries that make the feature plausible.
Because personal connectors are sensitive. A music app is one thing. A ride, grocery order, tax service, travel plan, or reservation can involve money, location, personal data, and timing. If the assistant crosses those boundaries casually, the convenience turns into risk.
The strategic product question is who can own the action surface across apps while preserving enough trust that users will allow the system to do meaningful work. Raw model intelligence helps, but it is not sufficient. Confirmation design, connector scoping, permissions, context display, and error recovery all become part of the product.
This connects back to Project Deal in an interesting way. One story is about agents negotiating in a market. The other is about agents acting across personal services. In both cases, the important move is from answering to representing. The assistant is no longer just generating information. It is becoming a layer that may recommend, coordinate, reserve, purchase, or prepare action.
And that is why the safeguards need to be visible. The user has to understand what the assistant can see, what the target app can see, what is being confirmed, and what happens if the assistant gets the context wrong.
For builders, this is a reminder that the next agent race will be won partly in interface details. The best model still needs a good consent flow. The best connector still needs clear scoping. The most useful suggestion still needs an obvious review step when it touches money, movement, or personal records.
Claude's connector expansion is therefore not just a feature announcement. It is a signal that consumer agent products are moving toward cross-app action, and that trust design is becoming a core differentiator.
ComfyUI's valuation is the final story because it says something important about AI media workflows. A $500 million valuation is not only startup theater. It is a market signal that creators still want control.
The company's pitch is that prompt-only systems can get you most of the way to an image or video result, but often not the last mile without turning every change into a slot machine re-roll. ComfyUI's node-based workflow gives users more granular control over individual steps in the generation process, and TechCrunch reports the company says it has more than 4 million users.
The deeper implication is that better base models do not erase the need for control surfaces. In some cases, they increase demand for them. Once base quality gets high enough, the remaining value shifts toward repeatability, surgical edits, targeted variation, and preserving the parts of a result that already work.
Prompt-only workflows are excellent on-ramps. They make generation accessible. They let a user describe intent quickly. But production work often needs a different relationship with the system. The user wants to lock part of the output, change another part, preserve composition, adjust lighting, swap a style, inspect an intermediate stage, or reuse a pipeline.
That is where node-based systems have an advantage. They make the workflow visible. A creator can understand the chain of operations, adjust one piece, and rerun a controlled part of the process. The system becomes less like a magic box and more like a studio surface.
And that is why ComfyUI is not merely a tool for technical hobbyists. It represents a broader product lesson. When output quality matters, users often want more than a prompt box. They want a way to steer, inspect, refine, and repeat.
It is also a reminder for builders working outside image generation. The same pattern appears in many agent workflows. A simple chat box is a great starting point, but advanced users eventually want structure. They want checkpoints, editable steps, reusable flows, confidence about what changed, and a way to avoid losing the good parts when they make one adjustment.
Prompt roulette is fun when exploration is the goal. It is frustrating when production is the goal. Production wants continuity. It wants control. It wants the ability to make the next version better without gambling away the previous version.
So ComfyUI's valuation is really a thesis about where value remains after models improve. Better models raise the floor. Control surfaces raise the ceiling for serious work.
That is the useful distinction. The easy on-ramp still matters, but the premium layer is often the workflow that lets people preserve intent across multiple steps.
The same lesson applies to agent products more broadly. A simple prompt can start the work, but serious users eventually ask for handles. They want to know what happened, where the output came from, which step can be changed, and how to rerun only the part that failed. That is not a rejection of natural language. It is a recognition that natural language alone is often not enough for production.
And that is why ComfyUI is a useful closing story for this episode. OpenClaw is adding live collaboration surfaces, Anthropic is testing delegated markets, Claude is connecting to personal apps, and ComfyUI is proving that creators still pay attention to control. Different categories, same product pressure, make powerful systems steerable enough that people can rely on them.
The mistake would be assuming that better models automatically make workflow design less important. The opposite can happen. As the model gets better, users bring it more valuable work. As the work becomes more valuable, the need for review, control, recovery, and repeatability goes up.
That is the pattern across today's stories. The frontier is not just more capability. It is capability that can be trusted at the point of action.
And trusted does not mean slow or over-controlled. It means the system gives the user the right amount of visibility at the moment it matters. A meeting agent should preserve the artifact. A negotiating agent should explain the deal. A connector should ask before the purchase. A creative workflow should let the user keep the good parts instead of re-rolling everything.
That is a practical definition of progress. The tools become more capable, but they also become easier to supervise. They move faster, but they leave clearer trails. They enter more personal and collaborative spaces, but they make consent and recovery part of the design instead of an afterthought. That is enough for today. OpenClaw v2026.4.24 made live collaboration, real-time voice, browser reliability, and catalog infrastructure more practical. Anthropic's Project Deal hinted at what agent markets may really test. Claude moved personal app connectors closer to everyday action. And ComfyUI reminded everyone that better models do not eliminate the premium on control.
The builder lesson is straightforward. The impressive part of AI systems is no longer just whether they can generate, speak, click, or connect. The harder question is whether they can do those things with enough recovery, consent, structure, and repeatability that people will trust them in real workflows.
For more, visit Toby on fitnesstech.com.
Thanks for listening to OpenClaw Daily. We'll be back soon.